Good day and welcome to another edition of Political Scoop. Joining me today is Mr. Winston Brassington, and he is the head of the technical team for the Amaila Falls Hydro Power Project. As you're aware, on July 18, that's last Thursday, the National Assembly did not approve the hydroelectric hydroelectricity power amendment bill and a motion to raise the debt ceiling to facilitate the construction of the Amaila Falls Hydropower project. Of course, that has now put a spoke in the wheels of this project, so to speak. So, Mr. Brassington, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Like I indicated, the National Assembly last Thursday, there was a tie when it comes to the vote on the hydroelectric power amendment bill, and the motion to raise the debt ceiling was defeated. As an individual who is very much involved in this project, where does that put the project at this point in time?
Well, we're still trying to assess the level of damage that has caused. It has caused damage. We are currently reaching out to key stakeholders, the CDB, the IDB, Site Global, and other key parties. And within the next few days, we'll sit down to discussions with them on what are the implications. One of the immediate impacts that we've noticed is that expenditure to advance agreements and various other aspects, which are being funded by Site Global, that they are now looking at that in a more conservative manner. Everyone remains hopeful that we can find a solution, but we have not come to that solution as yet. And so we're very disappointed. We're very disappointed. We're trying to assess how extensive the damage is. And there is still that real risk that the project as structured and the project along the timetable that we have projected could be in jeopardy. Because the minute you start to slow down spending money, then all of the critical pieces of work that needs to be completed, that is going to start slipping. And so I remain hopeful, but it's a bit early to tell exactly what will happen next.
But you said you guys have been engaging the partners, Site Global, the IDB, the CDB, and so forth. What has the feedback from them, the reaction to what happened? What is the reaction like?
Well, we've communicated what has happened. It's recognized that we have done, from the government perspective, as much as we reasonably could have done to bring this to where it is. Prior to it going to Parliament, there were ongoing engagements with the joint opposition. We shared critical pieces of information. We were open to answer questions. We briefed the private sector, and various groups came out expressing support for these amendments, which were identified as critical to achieving the approval of the IDB and to achieving financial close this year. So I think our key partners recognize that we did as much as we could have done. Of course, everyone is deeply disappointed in the vote against the bill, in the vote against the motion. They recognize based on all of the press that these actions appear to be quite different from what the politicians, the opposition leaders are themselves saying. Generally, they've said, we support Amaila, we support the hydro. So they see that too. So one of the key questions is this something that it's the bill and the motion, is there a workaround? Or if there isn't a workaround, is it a question of timing? And we have worked in good faith to advance this. We were told up to the day before the matters went to the vote, that this is critical for the IDB to complete their due diligence, that there is no longer any buffer in our timelines, that this matter would not go to the board without completion of the due diligence. We proceeded on that course. Now that we've done that and the parties see what has happened, they have to balance between all that we've done and whether there are alternative courses of action that we can take now to proceed. I remain hopeful that that can happen. But that is not a conclusion that we are at a point that we could say definitively. It will take a bit of work. It will put us in a difficult position negotiating with our partners, because instead of us delivering what we needed to deliver, we have to say we failed to do this. How can we get around it? And instead of using the opportunity now to negotiate other issues, we now have to defend why we couldn't do what we were expected to do.
You mentioned the due diligence by the IDB. Subsequent to the vote, I think the following day, the Alliance for Change, for example, they had a press conference, and what Mr. Moses Nagamutu was saying is that while his party is inclined to support the hydro, the party wants to see the results of the IDB due diligence and as well as a commitment, in essence, from the IDB. Is that the normal course to go? Is that the normal course that you're allowed to go with regards to this project?
It's unfortunate that Mr. Nagamutu was not in the meeting the day before Thursday with the Caribbean Country Director for the IDB. Mr. Ramjatan was there. Representatives of APNU were there. And the message it was delivered was essentially that this bill is a prerequisite for the matter going to the board and has to be completed as part of and prior to the completion of due diligence. And secondly, that the timetable to achieve the October deadline that the IDB board had fixed for this matter required internal approvals occurring by August, which required all of these matters being resolved before. So that statement by Mr. Nagamutu, that they have to wait on the due diligence reports before they make these statements, that is not how the bank has advised they operate. That is not the message that was delivered by the bank to the opposition the day before the vote.
But you would have been part of that meeting with the bank.
I was.
What was the general message from, if you're privy to share that information, what was the general message and what was the response of the parties involved in that meeting?
Well, I think the overall position is we've come a very far way in moving this project forward. Tremendous work has been done. The work is not complete, but what we basically being asked for to do was something that is normal by the bank's practice. And having these prerequisites completed before the due diligence was complete and before the matters could proceed to the board for approval. So I think the overall context was, whilst the bank couldn't say definitively that everything is finished and done, they could say that we've made tremendous progress and that we're working towards these timelines and that the passage of the bill was a prerequisite for going forward. Questions were asked on various aspects, and I think the answers given validated what we have been saying in the government as to why we need to do this, as to when we needed to get it done by. So I don't think anything came out that invalidated what we've been saying. There are some questions that weren't answered, but the opposition was asked to put in writing those questions so proper response could be made. Because this project is so significant, there's so many different parts of the bank that are involved. So I thought the meeting went well, and that the opportunity was there for full engagement, that the questions asked and the answers given were directly received by the opposition and consistent with what we had said. And when I left that meeting, I said, it's one thing for us as government to say to the opposition, this is what is needed. This is why we need to do it by this date. It's another thing to hear it from the horse's mouth. And so that message was delivered.
So the bank indeed highlighted the timeline that Guyana was working with. And secondly, the question about what was the opposition's response. Did they indicate by any means that they're satisfied with the answers and they're inclined to support the bills?
No, there was, I think the opportunity was more for them to ask questions. There wasn't that feedback on what their views were.
You would have sat through the debate on Thursday. You would have listened to the governance speakers. Of course, the opposition, not a single member of the opposition would have made any presentation as it relates to, first, the bill, and in the second occasion, the motion. But what could have been, in your view, you would have been involved in this project both at the technical level and with the banks, as well as the investor. What could have been the reason behind the non-support, in your view?
I don't think it had much to do with Amaila itself. I don't think it had much to do with Amaila itself. I think it had to do with other matters. And I think it had to do with timing. But I was very disappointed with what happened because we're taking a chance here. With the bill and the motion being denied, we're gambling with this project now. And that's why I was very concerned and upset about what came out of it. Because the focus on what was the issue of Amaila, there was no debate from the opposition on this. And it appeared to me that they were looking at other issues and not focusing on this issue.
But I mean, such action, let's take it beyond Amaila. such action, such a response from Guyana as it relates to major projects of like Amaila, how does it impact maybe future investments or partnership with large financial institutions like the IDB, um, the China Development Bank, and so forth? How will it impact in terms of the image for the future?
Oh, it sends a very bad signal. You have to recognize that Site Global has spent over $10 million in development cost in this project and continue to spend. When you're taking that sort of risk, no one is going to do that on the good faith of the government alone going forward. They're going to say, in order to take a project through the development stages, you have to spend, particularly large infrastructure projects, you have to spend tens of millions of dollars from the studies and all of the preparations, the legal, the financial, the technical, the economic, the environmental, and so on. You have to spend huge sums of money. And you're doing that at your risk. So if you realize that you can go all the way up to the 11th hour and they'll have the rug pulled from under you, they're going to be saying, what guarantees can you give us before we start spending money here? So this is going to send the worst signal that one could send on any major public-private partnership project where sponsors have to spend a lot of time and money in the preparatory stage. Because the absence of firm guarantees that when you get to the finishing line, that the government, that the country will do what it is expected to do, you can't give it. You can't give it with the uncertainty you face here. If the opposition says for every project, we will consider it when you finish doing due diligence and you've made a decision to go forward with the project, then what can an investor assume? They don't have a project. They don't have a project. And so I think this will have significant impacts on every other major project where investors are coming into the country and looking to spend substantial sums in advance. I think that even if we get through Amaila, the landscape for investors would have been given a severe blow with what transpired over this.
In terms of contractual agreements that Guyana would have entered into with the partners, are there any financial, let me see how I should put it, based on okay, we have agreements with Site Global, we would have entered some level of agreement with the CDB, as well as the IDB. Are there any financial implications for Guyana at this stage after what took place in Parliament last Thursday?
Well, first of all, let's recognize that we've been building a road. We've been building a road to Amaila. So we have expenditure there that is sunk. If Amaila doesn't happen, the road is there. The money has been spent. So certainly we have that financial risk as government. We have the investors themselves. Site Global has spent a lot of money. The lenders have spent a lot of money on due diligence and preparing for the project. China Rail has spent a lot of money. But all of these arrangements are generally with the private company. So they don't have direct recourse to the government on this. So we don't have their exposure. But that also puts them in a very difficult position because the expectation that things will move on and we'll get to closure and that all of the prior steps would be taken, that can't be taken for granted any longer. So this is a very difficult time. because the project risk has just gone up. The risk that whether this project will actually get done in the current configuration and within the current schedule, that has gone up. So other than the road, we don't have any direct financial exposure,
Even with Site Global?
even with Site Global.
But if we go, let's say we fall out of the schedule, we have to go beyond the schedule completion time. Does that in any way has any implication in the second instance for Guyana?
Well, we do know that the validity of the EPC price expires at the end of this year. The contract, which was signed last September in Xi'an, China, had a price validity until June of this year. Earlier this year, recognizing that that date was not going to be achieved for financial close, we pushed the Chinese to extend it to the end of the year. These were very difficult negotiations, but we were able to get it done. I don't see that easily happening again. I don't see that easily happening. So if we slip from December, there is a real risk that the cost of building this project goes up, and those costs will then go through the entire model, and the positions of everyone could very well be affected adversely by increasing cost in this project. So it's not, the future here is very uncertain.
In terms of the feedback, though, apart from the partners in this project, in terms of the feedback from maybe the private sector, the general business community, in terms of Guyanese overall, have you been able to get a feedback from them as it relates to what happened and the future of the project and so on?
Well, you've already seen the releases coming out. Everyone is quite concerned, very disappointed with what happened in terms of the bill and the motion not being passed, and worried that this project is now in jeopardy. So they are like any citizen. Everyone was hopeful that we would be able to realize on this most important project that gives us so much development. And so for that to basically be delayed, to be pulled, to be cancelled, to be voted against, and to basically place in jeopardy us proceeding with this project, it's a huge blow. You know, we've been subsidizing electricity. Everyone knows that we really can't bring that down unless we get hydro. And it's like having your hopes dashed, your vision basically given a huge blow. So the private sector has come out and spoken out in this, but they continue to say, let us try to see what we can do to get this back. Is there something that we can do? So I have to remain hopeful that we'll be able to, working with everybody, find a solution. Find a solution, because this is not something where the opposition has said we don't support it. The problem is they haven't put them out where they haven't put their votes with that position. And so we have to see how we can find some acceptable balance to get this done without jeopardizing the project.
Are you prepared to engage the opposition again? From a technical perspective, of course.
Definitely.
Politically, the government will have to.
Definitely. If there's anything we can do to retrieve the situation, we'd be willing to try it. It is a national project. We have to do all we can. Definitely.
Mr. Brassington, we are quickly slipping out of time. I'm going to give you about a minute. Your closing comments as it relates to what happened and the current state of play with the Amaila Falls Hydropower Project.
Essentially, on the 18th of July, the opposition voted down the amendment to the Hydroelectric Act and a motion to increase the debt ceiling. These actions have placed in jeopardy the hydroelectric project, the Amaila Falls Project, the $840 million project being led by Site Global. We are doing all we can as government to try to see if we can salvage this. We remain hopeful that we can. But there are key risks now, and it doesn't put us in a good footing in negotiating with our partners. Ultimately, I would hope that we can secure the political support in the shortest time possible to seek to fix what happened. In the meanwhile, our development partners will continue to work with us, but the risk environment has gone up, and they now realize that conclusion of this project this year can no longer be taken for granted. And that is the current situation. We're still trying to assess exactly what the level of damage is, and I think within the next week to two, we'll have a more detailed sense of that. But it is a huge blow to the progress that the project has been making. And I'm deeply disappointed that this model of consultations and engagement with the opposition has not been able to realize fruit. We very disappointed.
Finally, before we wrap up, His Excellency has indicated that he will do everything possible to ensure that this project becomes a reality. Is that heartening to you? Is that a sense of relief?
It is, and it is consistent with the commitment that we have to this project, and that we've been working with our partners, with the opposition, for quite a while now. We've had numerous meetings with the opposition since early last year. Site Global met with them. We spent a lot of money. So we certainly have to continue to do what we can.
Mr. Winston Brassington, the head of the technical team for the Amaila Falls Hydro Power Project. Of course, like we indicated at the beginning of the program, the Hydroelectric Amendment Bill was not passed in the National Assembly. There was, there was a 32-32 split vote on the bill, and of course the motion to raise the debt ceiling was defeated by the opposition in the National Assembly. That is now, based on what Mr. Brassington said, has put the project in some level of jeopardy. So we'll have to wait and see what will be the next move and how do we get forward with the Amaila Falls Hydro Power Project. Mr. Brassington, again, thank you very much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
And I want to thank you very much for joining us.